LDComics is a women-led welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallis Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, well, thank you, Wallis. Sorry, to run us into it a little bit. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're Tom and Jane from Colossive Press, based in South East London. Colossive Press made its debut at the communal table at the Catford Comic and Zine Fair in December 2017. And since then, we've published more than 50 books and zines, plus other bits and pieces. Most of what we do is kind of comics adjacent, I suppose, but hopefully some of our thoughts on what we do and why we do it will be of interest. To start things off, though, I'm going to go back to the previous century and display a very rare artifact. Right, this is a comic, an untitled autobiographical comic that I wrote and drew in about 1994. And it was published in a zine called Bliss, which I photocopied at work at the time. Don't try and read it, obviously. I'll narrate it in a second. Just for a little bit of context, sadly, my mum and dad both died within a couple of years of each other when I was in my early 20s. And this comic was about my response to, having to sort out all their stuff in the house. Sorry, just provided a copy. I'll explain exactly why we're showing it here once I've read through it, so it shouldn't take too long. When my widowed dad died, it was up to me to sort out his stuff. Box after box of old bills, letters, travel tickets to Ireland, bits of old checkbooks. Among all this ephemera were stacks of old, unordered photos, dozens of tiny black and white prints from the 50s and 60s, a parade of unknown faces in unknown places. I couldn't bin them. I thought I should, but I couldn't do it. Maybe it's because here were people's faces, looking up at me with hopes and expectations, untouched by the future. A moment in their life pinned down like a butterfly. If I threw the photo away, that moment would be lost forever, thrown on the dump to rot and fade. Even though I recognised few of the people or places, I felt some primal urge to keep the story going. Maybe it's an order and chaos thing. I'm trying to prevent the energy from these events dissipating meaninglessly into the cosmos, fighting off a little bit of entropy. If a photo went, another memory line would have been dissolved. It would be as if these people had never existed. So I kept them, even though I'll probably never look at them again. But I've done my bit to keep the story going. I've done my bit. Okay, so the reason I was sent up into the loft to dig that out is because it ties in quite nicely with a lot of what we're really aiming to do with Colossive, and which Jane is going to talk about in a few minutes. There's a thread going back to Bliss Comics 30 years ago there, which stretches through into what we're doing with Colossive. So again, a bit more context. Around about the time I was producing that strip, there was quite a flurry of small press activity. And this was pre-internet, of course, or before the internet really became mainstream. So a lot of the activity took place through magazines like Zum here, which I wrote quite a lot of reviews for. There's also Bypass, Caption, which used to have a convention every year in Oxford. But the activity never really made it to the next level. Small press comics never really made it into the mainstream. And a sort of combination of my own diffidence, I guess, and life getting in the way meant that I drifted away from the scene. Okay, so anyway, fast forward about 15 years, and I found myself with my nose pressed up against the glass again. By now, I was heading into my mid-40s. I was feeling a bit, I don't know, a bit isolated. I didn't really have a creative outlet at the time, and just had the sense that life was passing me by a little. And I just really wanted to be part of something, part of a scene again. So I discovered Andy Oliver's small press coverage on Broken Frontier, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. And suddenly, here in London anyway, there seem to be lots of events like the ones I've put the flyers up for on this slide. I began to write for Broken Frontier and started going to book launches and award presentations. I think that's where I first met Wallis upstairs at Foyles. Anyway, what I discovered was a friendly, inclusive, and encouraging community of engaged, smart, and creative people. And it's a community that really doesn't have any gatekeepers. There's no entry fee, application form. As soon as you've made your mark on your bit of paper, you're part of the club. So anyway, my drawing skills certainly hadn't improved over the previous 20 years. So I had to find other ways to try and put my stuff together and express myself. Whether it was book arts and found imagery, like the High Precision Ghost zine you can see there, photography on my phone, which went into the Poison Street zine, or reimagining of local history, which is Ad Astra per Croydon, where I revealed the unknown history of Croydon Spaceport. And that's really one of our main messages. Work with what you've got, what skills you've got, whatever they are. Because, whoever you are and wherever you are, and this is, I'm saying a bit of a cliche, but, you've got something to say, and there's always a way of saying it. Okay, so before I hand over to Jane, just in case anyone's wondering about the name Colossive Press, this is my dad, John, and he's seen here driving the Continental Express on Redcar Beach sometime in the 1950s, I think. Now, he left school in County Mayo in Ireland when he was 13, and if he didn't always have the right word for a situation, he'd quite happily make one up on the spot. And one of those was colossive, which he created when colossal or massive just wasn't quite big enough. So that seemed like the perfect name for a small press like ours. And it's lovely, really, that we still do something every day or think about him every day, and he still plays a part in our life.
Right, now I'd like to introduce you to my dad. This is my dad, Gordon Gibbens. He was always a very keen photographer, but after my mum died in 1995, he retired a year or so early from his job in a sports shop and started spending more time going out and about with his camera in London. And at some point, we're not quite sure when, but towards the end of the 90s, he started to document the graffiti and street art scene. And he got to know a lot of the writers and artists. This is him in about 2014, getting right on Thierry Noir's nerves while he's trying to work. But he loved watching them work, and he loved the way walls were always changing. There was always something new to look at. And he didn't differentiate between graffiti and street art. He was just as happy to see old style graffiti writing on a hoarding as he was a great big mural. And as far as that was concerned, anything's better than a blank wall. Fast forward in now to 2012. So he'd been out there photographing things for about 15 years, the scene. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer and he was 81. And his response to this was ignore it as much as he possibly could and carry on going out with his camera, photographing street art. So that passion helped keep him and by extension us going for years. But it got to the point in 2016 where he was really very ill. He was wasting away in front of us. He couldn't eat or drink, so he was fitted with a feeding peg where everything goes in through your belly. He had a catheter. He couldn't hear. He couldn't really walk very far. And while he was in hospital, he got an infection. So he was in there for 2 months in a little room surrounded by blank walls, which was absolute hell to him. And we were told he had a handful of weeks left to live. So you kind of think, oh, well, that's that then. He was moved to a horrendous nursing home, and within minutes we knew, no, he's not staying here. And with the support of St Christopher's Hospice, we got him back home again. And what do those quacks know, eh? We had another 7 months of taking him out in a wheelchair to photograph street art. And even when he was admitted to the hospice, right near the end, we still had to take him out down the road to Penge where we live to look at the new street art that was popping up. And he taught us all a real lesson, which is that you should find something you love doing in life and then find a way to continue doing it no matter what. So after Dad died in April 2017, we were left with piles and piles of photographs. We had 33,000 of street art alone. And I knew I should do something with them. And after much dithering and delay, we decided to publish a book of them alongside Dad's story through Colossive and to give all the profits to St. Christopher's. And how graffiti saved my dad's life ended up serving many purposes, not least for me, because I found it very therapeutic and cathartic to write, and it helped me work through my grief and get a lot of things straight in my head. But we were also overwhelmed by the response to Dad's story from all sorts of people who come to the book in all different ways, and the different ways they'd all related to it. So everyone loves the street art pictures, obviously, but I think one of the biggest responses has been to a spread near the end of the book that includes some photos I very nearly deleted a couple of days after Dad died. So I'll just read the cheery accompanying text. So, during those final few days in the hospice, whenever he was half awake, Dad kept making the same little miming gesture to me. He wanted his camera. I'd pass it to him and watch him turn it over and over in his hands, looking at it quizzically. I didn't think he really knew what he was doing. Back home after he'd died, I was preparing to put his final batch of pictures on Flickr. It's what he would have wanted after all. That's when I noticed he'd taken a handful of photographs from the hospice bed. They were off kilter and out of focus, but they were all pointing towards the light on the ceiling or the sun streaming in through the curtains. Anything's better than a blank wall. But it wasn't all about street art. Dad loved to photograph anything weird, wonderful, or unexpected. And he looked forward to going to Pride every year. He popped up in the middle of protest marches, all kinds of events. And he also left us with hundreds of photographs, sort of inexplicable photographs of interesting things he'd stumbled across on the streets of London, most of which he hadn't seen fit to mention. And I should point out that we live 3 miles down the road from where he lived. We saw him all the time, and I spoke to him at least once a day, and I always asked him what he'd been up to. So it was this picture in particular that inspired our next couple of books for St. Christopher's. I mean, you'd think you'd at least mention this in passing if you'd seen it that day, wouldn't you? But perhaps he couldn't find the words. Also, after Dad died, we had to clear the house where I'd grown up with my mum, Dad and Nan. And it's an ordinary end of terrace house in suburbia, and you'd think it would take a few weeks. But once all the medical equipment was out of there were just, it looked tidy, but it was full of cupboards and drawers, and they were all packed with things with no logic behind what had been put in where. So you'd go over there thinking, oh, I'll just clear out that cutlery and take it to the charity shop. But the cutlery drawer would also have all the sympathy cards that were sent to us when my mum died. So it was overwhelming, and it literally took forever. I mean, we've only just about finished it. So everything we stumbled across seemed to have a story, and I didn't want to throw anything away, but I knew we didn't have room to keep it either, even if we got rid of all our comics, which obviously we weren't going to do. And rediscovering all this stuff, I felt like I was grieving for my mum and Nan again, as well as Dad and Tom's parents and other friends and relatives. And of course, it made us think about our own mortality and, what are we keeping this stuff and who for, and who are we keeping it for? Because we don't have any kids and we don't even have any nieces and nephews. And I also read that people tend to fade away from history after 3 or 4 generations. So it was like everyone was disappearing. So I think to help me through this period, I wrote Nan, which is mainly a book of anecdotes about my relationship with my nan, who, as I said, lived with us, and a little bit about what I knew of her earlier life before I came along. And it was illustrated with photographs, family photographs, and things, pictures of things we'd found around the house. And the book also served as a goodbye to the house. And most of my other zines have been very personal and anecdotal as well. As much as I like to think I'm brimming with original ideas, I seem to end up writing about what's in front of me and using the photographs and things I have to hand to illustrate them. And someone who read Nan told me that the ancient Egyptians used to believe that we die twice. Once when you take your last breath, and again when someone mentions your name for the final time. So while I couldn't do anything to stop them dying the first time, I suppose what I'm trying to do with these books and zines is ensure that nobody I love dies a second time. Not on my watch, or like Tom said in his comic from 1994, I've done my bit to keep the story going. Anyway, meanwhile, I nearly said next slide, please. I didn't want to do that. Tom came up with the Colossive Cartographies idea after he did a bookbinding course just before the first lockdown. And one of the first things he made was a Turkish map fold, which is a sheet of A4 that folds up into an A6 cover and then pops out very pleasingly. And he thought this would make a good format for a series of one-pagers by different creators. And I was one of the first people he asked to do one, probably because it would have been a bit awkward if he hadn't. But when I was faced with a blank page, all that anxiety and imposter syndrome kicked in, particularly when I saw the list of other creators. But the trick is to think about what you can do rather than what you can't do. And although it's obviously important to carry on learning new things. So I ended up responding to the map format to tell a story my mum told me about a family friend who died on the Burma Railway in the Second World War. And I used the map of the railway plus old photographs and postcards to illustrate it. His name was Bobby Branston. He was my great uncle's best friend. And when my mum was a little girl, she used to say she'd marry him when she grew up. And when Dad, Tom and I went to Thailand a few years after Mum had died, we found Bobby's grave and put some flowers on it. And I think telling this story was just another way of keeping somebody's name alive in some small way, even though I know very little else about him. And towards the bottom of the page, it includes the line, "We touch each other's lives in little ways we'd never imagined," which is something that's been hammered home to us over recent years. By telling each other our stories, we stay connected and understand more about the world and one another. It's what makes us human.
Okay, so wanting to hear other people's stories and see how they express what they've got to say was really one of the drivers behind the cartographies, because it's only a small format in itself, but it builds up into I think the cumulative sort of collection of the work becomes much bigger than the sum of its parts. So it's always a thrill to see how people respond to the format. I mean, I've put a few of the more recent ones up here so you can see how people have used it. I mean, whether they use the folds for artistic effect, as you can see here, or lean into the map element to think about place and location and stuff like that, or just do something that we hadn't anticipated at all and just knocks us backwards. Oops. So, I mean, a lot of my initial contacts were in the small press world. As you can probably see, these were the first 17 we published, so you did quite a few familiar names there from the small press comics world and indie comics. But we were also keen to rope in people from as many artistic practices as we could. So if you're a writer, an illustrator, poet, photographer, whatever, if we think everyone's got a story, then everyone's got a cartography in them. And that's how we managed to publish 35 of these now over the past 18 months or so. We just had number 36 turn up in our inbox about half an hour before we started, so that'll be out soon. As I said earlier, I can't really draw comics the way I'd like to, so I've had to improvise, and that's really what I love about working in a small press, the fact that you can just make it up as you go along. You're not tied into any strictures or, external, what's the word? Nonsense, yeah. So, I mean, that's how we came up with some of these formats. So, for instance, Tracy Pitcher, one of our collaborators, her hand-sewn Rhizo zines, you can see the Skater for Godot, etc. The double concertina format for the Sunflower zine, which you can see going across the bottom, that was photos by Jane's dad and words on the other side by Jane. The sort of dossier format for the testing site, which you can see on the right there, which has got everything sort of, chucked in and bound together. And even, God help us, the hand-bound tetra flexagons, which make up high precision ghosts too, which are very great fun to make. But all of these, I mean, whatever the format, they all started off as a blank page and even the vaguest germ of an idea. So like Jane said, you tie yourself in knots worrying about the things you can't do. But if you just work with what you've got, in terms of material and skills, and you probably end up surprising yourself anyway, because that's what we do. We're very creative individuals, whatever,
Not just us.
Well, not just us. I mean,
No.
humanity in general, I mean. It's easy to be intimidated by what other people are doing. You see people putting out what looks like amazing work, but, try and be inspired by them. Don't be intimidated. Okay, so that's us just about done, but let's just wrap up with a suitably grandiose climax. If you can hum some inspiring music, whatever, and we'll run through the Colossive Manifesto. Okay, so whatever your story is, it's worth telling.
Be inspired, not intimidated by other people's work.
Communicate and collaborate.
I want to do a different voice for this one. Find something you love doing and find a way to carry on doing it, no matter what.
Work with what you have, but never stop learning.
Read and listen actively to other people's stories.
Don't overthink it. Get on with it and finish it.
And remember, anything's better than a blank page.
And that's it from us, really.
Okay, well, hello. Yeah, super exciting to be here with you guys tonight. For me, one of the greatest things that's come out of the pandemic is to be able to connect with the LDC community. So thank you, Wallis, for inviting me and the rest of the team as well. It's such an honor. So I was going to give you a quick introduction to my work and then talk about some specific projects. My name is Ali Hodgson, or the Cartooning Monk, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But basically, I'm a values-led graphic artist. I work through the mediums of visual storytelling, visual communication, visual thinking, which of course includes comics. And my practice is very much values-led, so I'm particularly interested in exploring complex social and ecological issues. And the past few years I've been living on the magical Isle of Man. Not many people know where it is, which I quite like. But you can see from the map that if you draw a circle around the British Isles, the Isle of Man's right in the middle there. Yeah, that was quite significant in ancient times, and hopefully I'll have time to talk a bit more about that later. So I studied illustration at the art school in Dundee in Scotland many moons ago now, where my obsession with comics kind of bridged from childhood into adulthood. And despite Dundee kind of having a rich history of comics, I was the only, well, one of very few that was kind of exploring the medium at the time. My work was very uncommercial. I was really into zine culture, as you can see here. And then for my final degree show, I created a series of zines about teeth. So I created this fictitious kind of system for predicting people's futures based on the shape of their teeth. And then lots of weird things happened as a result of releasing this series. I had a lot of people contacting me saying that the predictions had come true and how did I know, and that kind of thing. And then I weirdly even predicted my own future without meaning to through it as well. So it's a long story that I don't have time to share, but it was a fun project. And then I went on to study visual communication at the Royal College of Art in London. And that's where I started to find and create more of a comics community, which has been really important for me. I ran comics clubs and workshops in London and beyond to explore the medium. And I was just really interested in how to push the boundaries of what comics are. So I was making interactive comics and non-linear comics and just anything that broke the rules, really. And including this series here, which was about the power of intention. And it's quite odd, but it got published by some obscure philosophy journal that I can't remember the name of a long time ago now. And then not long after my time at the RCA, life took a bit of a strange twist. So I became very unwell with a bunch of, at the time, kind of undiagnosable but debilitating health issues, to the point where I could barely look after myself. I was in and out of hospitals, huge amounts of physical pain, that kind of thing. So this probably carried on for about 10 years. And it was like this strange kind of long drawn out near-death experience. And at the time I kind of felt like I'd fallen between the cracks of the world and become very invisible. But during that time, to the best of my ability, I kept drawing and writing as much as I could. And I have boxes of sketchbooks stuffed with these mad scribbles and kind of attempts at comics that you can see some samples here. And I had a flick through them for the first time, literally in years, just yesterday in preparing for this presentation. So it was amazing to kind of reconnect with that stuff. And I was never well enough to finish anything, but it was all kinds of stories about, obviously about coping with the illness and the funny and the dark sides of things, but also all kinds of really weird, strange stories. So there's one here about an accountant that collects dead birds. And then there's another one about a man who found the entire universe in the mouth of a reindeer and then drops down dead with shock. So all kinds of weird stuff. And then I found this other page that I quite liked. So there's two characters and the words say, so on the left, it says, "This is Poe. Poe is the inner world, the unseen realities that give birth to our outer dream." And then on the right, it says, "This is Ow. Ow is the outer expression of the inner world, the seen reality, daytime. Dawn is a manifestation of all the creativity that has taken place during the night, what we experience as outer reality." So I've no idea what to do with this material, but I feel it's bizarre enough to kind of warrant me doing something with it at some point. And I've never actually shown it before as well, so you're getting a sneak peek. Yeah, so skipping forwards to more recent times, I've been fortunate enough to step back into having a creative career over the past few years. And I get to work for all kinds of amazing, wonderful people. Quite often these days creating comics, which is wonderful, on all kinds of topics. So on the left, this is one for a client during Fashion Revolution Week. It was something for their social media, and I've done at the top right there is something for the World Fair Trade Organization. And I also worked on a children's book about meditation there as well. So this is just a little sample. But I thought I'd just take some time to talk a bit more in depth about a couple of projects that I did last year. So this time last year I was invited to be involved with a project called OK Dementia. And it's run by an amazing social design collective called Enable Foundation, who operate between London and Hong Kong. And OK Dementia is it's all about changing the culture around dementia. So the project was focused in Hong Kong, but obviously dementia is a massive global issue as well. We've got kind of massive aging populations as we live longer and have less children. And I saw a thing in the BBC just the other day about how dementia cases are expected to triple globally by 2050. So that's an estimated 153 million people with dementia, which is kind of mind-boggling. And who's going to look after these people and who's going to pay for that? I think perhaps the younger generations don't know what's around the corner with this as well. So it felt like a really important project to be involved with. And it's kind of often a topic that's not seen as very glamorous as well. So it's been great to get my teeth into it. So long story short, Enable Foundation ran a project where they connected 10 dementia NGOs with 10 designers or design studios. And this was to collaborate on 10 different dementia related topics. And then I was brought in to create illustrations for each of these projects. And this was part of a showcase in Hong Kong in February last year. And of course, I had to take it a step further and started to create comics from the project as well, to help communicate and hopefully make more accessible what could be perceived as quite challenging and complex information. Which, as we know, is the amazing power of comics. So, for example, here, this page is all about the rituals of body cleaning and personal hygiene. So it's and how we take these rituals for granted as well. So we've got this nice chap here under the shower with his coat and his brolly. But obviously, you know, when we take a shower, we know what order to do things in. You know, we take our clothes off, we get the temperature right, we climb in, we wash ourselves, we switch the shower off, we climb out, we dry ourselves, we get dressed, and we kind of, you know, that's very simple for most of us, but actually for someone with dementia, there's quite a lot of things in that sequence, and can be quite challenging. So how can we use the design world to help us kind of break this sequence down, for example, and communicate it in different ways, and to do it with empathy as well? So here's some more examples from the series. The one on the left is about organizing concepts of time. The one on the right is about communication through touch. And if you want to read these, they're all available on my website, which is just at the bottom there. But it was, yeah, it's been a great project to work on, because it's not about forcing people with dementia to behave differently, or to kind of not accept their you know, the challenges that they're facing, but about building empathy and using creativity to explore other modes of communication. And again, comics are just such a fantastic way, I think, of exploring, well, not just for dementia, but many other topics as well. To raise awareness in ways that are kind of really accessible and playful and fun, and engaging, hopefully, as well. So the project evolved, and then later in the year, Enable Foundation asked if I would make an animation for them, and this was in collaboration with the British Council in Hong Kong as part of their Spark 2021 festival, which was in October, I think. And that was all about inclusivity, and we just wanted to explore what it was like to have dementia through the animations. And here's the little team that we formed to create the animation. And actually, this project might not have happened if it wasn't for the LDC community and the people that I've met through it. So a group of us who met last year at the LDC residency that I think was in January last year, we now meet regularly to kind of help each other out with our comics projects. And it was through that I met the lovely Lynn Hood, and I don't know if she's here, but I hope she is. But she's a fantastic comics maker and a very talented animator as well. And by weird coincidence, I was sharing these comics with her and the rest of the group. And Lynn said that if I ever wanted help animating them, that she'd love to be involved. And then about a week later, Enable Foundation asked me to make an animation, which I've never actually done before. So it was a great coincidence. Yeah, and we got Lynn on board, which was great. So here's some pictures from the OK Dementia Spark Festival that was in Hong Kong. I sadly couldn't make it in person. Obviously, the pandemic's been quite tricky. But Enable Foundation ran lots of great workshops around dementia, and the animation was part of this as well. And I won't show the animation here because it's too long, but again, it's on my website if anyone wants to see it. So I'll move on to another project now. This is Jumping Mouse. And Jumping Mouse is my graphic memoir in progress that I'm very slowly chipping away at. And I was very grateful that the first volume was longlisted for the LDC Awards just recently. And this is also some lovely words from Andy Oliver at Broken Frontier about it as well. And Jumping Mouse, it's part myth and it's part memoir. The myth part is based on the Native American myth of Jumping Mouse, which is about a mouse seeking freedom or enlightenment. And it's woven together with my own life story. So along the lines of what I was sharing earlier, this kind of journey of how everything fell apart through the illness and the loss that created as well. But I ended up on this unexpected and very mysterious adventure of I suppose, healing and stepping back into the world. And I ended up becoming a modern day monk in the mountains of Spain, which is where the monk part of the cartooning monk is from. And alongside the comics work, I also practice and teach meditation as well. So all these things I never expected in my life, but here I am. So here's some more pages from it. Yeah, something that's really helped me with the project was also having the lovely Emma Burley, who's here tonight, as a mentor, and her guidance has been brilliant. But also the LDC Comics residency and the pitching weekends and all these fantastic things that you guys offer. That yeah, if you have the opportunity, please do them. They're brilliant. Yeah, the comic is black and white, as you can see, and the story starts with everything falling apart. So this particular spread is set in Scotland. So we've got lots of moody, rugged country scenes. And the artwork itself, it was all created in Procreate on the iPad, and then put together, and then I typeset it in InDesign. I also have a background in printmaking, and I think that's kind of really influenced how I create the art, the kind of layering of white pencil on black ink, even though it's digital, building up layers, playing with negative space. And as you can see, some parts are quite realistic, and then other parts get more dreamlike to fit the story. So I've self-published the first volume of Jumping Mouse. If you like the look of it, it's available on my Etsy shop. And I've got a digital version there as well as a hard copy. And yeah, I guess my greatest wish is that it just kind of reaches the right people, and the people who need it, I suppose, particularly those that are perhaps feeling in quite a difficult situations in life and wanting a bit of hope. It's kind of the story that I wish I'd found at certain points in my life. I have no idea how I'm going to finish it, or if I'll ever find a publisher, but I'm going to keep plodding along with it. And then this is another page from it. So this is part of the myth part of the story, and this is kind of a bit more cartoon-like, and it shows the earth being created and all the animals marching down to be on Earth. And yeah, I guess the story is kind of for anyone that's faced challenge, as I was saying, and kind of reconnecting with the wonder of life, no matter what's going on in it. And hopefully the artwork reflects that as well. So finally, to end, I thought I'd share a little fun project that I'm also working on at the moment, and it's really only just at the beginning, and this drawing isn't even finished yet, but it's currently titled A Brief History of UFOs on the Isle of Man, and I started it last year as a bit of a tongue-in-cheek project, but it's weirdly gaining traction, so I feel like I need to keep going with it. So I mentioned previously that the Isle of Man has a bit of a reputation for being quite a mysterious, strange place, and it's full of folklore and myths and legends and superstitions. And when I first ended up here a few years ago, which was again a complete accident, I kept meeting people with these strange stories of things that they'd seen in the sky or otherwise, and I didn't know what to do with these, but I felt I had to gather them. And start drawing them as well. So I thought I'd share a few panels. So here we've got the Isle of Man, and the image on the right is a fireball that exploded off the shore. And here it says, on the 25th of October 1966, a mysterious moving oval had a strange effect on witnesses, including permanently turning a farmer's hair grey. And on the 17th of July 1978, a man at Perrick Bay reported seeing a small grey being who gave him a strange green rock before vanishing. So I started putting these odd stories on social media, and I had a lot of unexpected and quite odd people reaching out to me kind of privately, including a number of people from the local media here on the Isle of Man. So I'm not quite sure where this project is going to lead, but I'm curious. And then finally, so this is a drawing of Snayfel Summit, which is the highest point on the Isle of Man. And if you remember the map that I showed you at the beginning, with the Isle of Man in the middle, so Snayfel Summit is known as the only place in the world that you can see the 7 Celtic kingdoms in one view. So the 7 Celtic kingdoms are the Isle of Man, Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland, the sea and the sky. And on the 14th of January 2001, many witnesses called the police after seeing a large unidentified flying object hit one of the masts at the top of the hill, creating a large explosion. So after this, a search and rescue mission was scrambled. It was kind of reported in all the papers. I think helicopters came all the way from Wales to try and help, but nothing was ever found. So you can draw your own conclusions with that. Yeah, so that's me. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for having me.
So today I'm going to be talking about the work that I am currently doing and looking at a couple of things briefly that I think led to it. I first started making comics in the early 2000s, and I published a book called Tangles in 2010 that was about a memoir about our family's experience when my mom was diagnosed with dementia. And I published a book called Agnes Murderess in 2019 that was about it was historical fiction about a legendary murderess in British Columbia. But today I am going to be talking about the work that I'm doing now, which is about my journey since my partner died in April 2020. So my partner's name was Donamo. She and I came to the UK in 2011 together and met some of the ladies. She had many chronic illnesses, and she chose a medically assisted death in April 2020. And since then, I've been drawing comics. And I was thinking about like the kind of one line way that I would say what my comics are about right now is wondering where she is and wondering where I am and trying to talk about where we both are. So it will be 21 months since she died this week. I've been collecting and publishing these comics on Instagram. And what I'm most interested in talking about is how this work has pushed me as a cartoonist and as an artist. I have experienced the most intense and consistent artistic creative practice that I have ever known. I have been forced to try to find ways to convey things like grief and loss and joy that are really difficult to convey in more straightforward words and images. So I've been forced into a more poetic and abstract way of working. And I was also realizing as I was preparing for this talk that my work to try to do comics about death and pain and grief have forced me to learn how to convey joy as well. And the playfulness and the experimentalness that I have had to bring to my comics practice has, I think, helped me be more joyful and create more joyful work. So I want to say just a quick content warning before I read from my work. Obviously, my work is about trauma. It's about illness and death and grief. There's people here, thank you so much, who loved Donamo deeply and were close to her during her illness and death. And I know it is not easy to listen to these comics. And sometimes I'm so used to talking about this stuff that I think sometimes I read it as though it's normal. So that's another reason why I really appreciated Colossive Press and Ali for just talking so frankly about grief and loss and illness and death. I think that's all I want to say. Also, most of my comics I'll be showing to you full page instead of breaking them up into panels because I created them as full page images. So I've practiced this a few times. I think it's 20 minutes. If it looks like it's going over, I'll just skip some stuff, okay? So the work that I'm doing now, I think, has its roots in some mini comics that I made for the Comics and Medicine Conference in 2017. I was trying to write about what it was like to be partners with somebody who was always in extremely high levels of pain and extreme fatigue. And she also really struggled with nausea, which is probably many of you unfortunately know can be feel even worse than pain. And I was full of all the emotions that come with this journey, pain, grief, fear, anger. And I wanted to write about my experience particularly. I couldn't find a lot of stuff about what it was like to be partners with somebody who was chronically ill. And I also really wanted to experiment with form. So I was forcing myself to use this 4-panel form. And I'll just show you one of the comics. It's called No. And I had come into this mostly drawing comics that used pretty straightforward storytelling. And I started getting more poetic because I didn't want to draw all these images of Donamo in pain. And I wanted to find a way to convey the emotional truth of what I was working on. So here, this is about going to see a specialist that I think she had waited maybe a couple years to see. We came in, she kind of went on and on and on about her symptoms as she had prepared. Nobody was really listening. So I put all of her words in gray. And then we had the resident who kind of asked these rapid fire questions for about an hour. And you know, it's funny, like anyway, no, not going to go on a rant about the medical system. And then the specialist comes in and just takes 5 minutes to say, sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. And I had gotten into using these dark horizontal lines to convey some of the despair and the grief that we were feeling at that time. Yeah. So I made three of those booklets around 2017. And then I started doing this comic that I was posting to Instagram called Therapy Pony. And so you'll see Therapy Pony themselves later. Therapy Pony is actually a horse, but I didn't know that at the time. And I developed a few different characters in this world. And a couple of them were Sadbird and Cheetah, who were definitely me and Donamo. And I was so I had tried to use like kind of abstract imagery to discuss pain and grief. And now I was turning to creatures. On many days, Bird is too sad to see the flowers that line the path where Bird makes an effort to walk. They hope that fresh air and movement will lift their spirits, but you have to be able to move and breathe in order to get those benefits. And on many days, Bird cannot lift their neck enough to do either because of sadness. On other days, Bird walks and sees nothing, even when the foliage blazes with bright autumnal colors. Still other days, Bird sees the beauty that surrounds them, but it seems to belong to another world behind glass walls where Bird cannot go. I covered the top of the text with one of my windows, but during these desolate wanders, Bird thought it might help to visit Cheetah and rest a while and maybe have a snack. Bird is generally quite fixated on snacks. Cheetah, can you hear me, Cheetah? Yes. Hello, friend. Can I stay here for a little? You can. Do you have snacks? Oh, Bird, I haven't left the cave in days. I'm sorry, but there are no snacks for you. It's okay, you know me, I'm not really hungry, just sad. Your walking doesn't help? No. Maybe I should just stay inside like you. Why do you say that? Maybe it would be simpler. Staying inside never feels simple to me. My whole being longs for the outdoors. I struggle against bitterness and despair. I used to run for hours full of strength and joy. These days, I can only take the shortest of walks, and afterwards, I ache for days. I'm an idiot. How can I sit here and complain when your life is so much harder? It's not a contest. I think what I'll do now is every time I start to complain to myself on a walk, I'll say, shut up. What if you were a cheetah? Wow. So I was trying to just like kind of in a somewhat light way talk about some of the struggles we had as a partnership between somebody who is able-bodied and somebody who was in a great deal of pain. And I drew that comic in January of 2020. And shortly after that, Donomo's health really started to decline. This is Therapy Pony, who is kind of this figure who's full of joy and wisdom and offers counsel to the others. So Bird goes to find Pony to try to get some advice. The pony was dancing their heart out like there was no tomorrow. Sigh. Excuse me, Pony. Hi, Bird. I need help talking to Cheetah. And then they walk off in the sunset. And this was the last Therapy Pony comic I posted before Donomo got so sick and went into the hospital. And I really, I have a comic later that talks about that. So kind of, she died in April 2020. And I started making comics about a month later, even though I swore to my friends that I would not make comics about this. It was too awful. And I just am going to show you some of them. This is about 5 months after she died. I started working in this 12 panel format. For those of you who are comics nerds, you know that like our favorite grid often is the 9-panel grid, and that was something that I'd really fallen in love with. And I just kind of instinctively started using this 12-panel grid, and I realized that it felt quite unstable to me compared to the 9-panel grid and very appropriate. And I also just kind of dove into using my Pentel pocket brush pen, which I had difficulty controlling, and into kind of playing with words and images. I just have to move this annoying Zoom window that keeps getting in the way of my reading. Mostly my head is full of questions. Oops, sorry. In case you're wondering what it's like to go to bed alone and lie where she used to lie and try to sleep. How did she? How did we? What was she thinking when she? What was the last time we? Some of the questions might be answered in my journals. During the last weeks, I could only write in small booklets of folded scrap paper. The thought of recording any of this in a bound book, no. And I can't look at those booklets now. When she got up the last morning, went to bed the night before, made sure her hair. What about that moment before she left the house for the last time? And she said, I'm sorry to leave you with such a mess. How did she even form words? I was the one who called. I need some information about medically assisted death. I filled out the form for her to sign. I had to print it out and I had to fill it in. Please let me die. It's best to use the trained volunteers as witnesses for the form. She wants to die. We witnessed it. We signed here. Thank you. I scheduled the doctors to assess her. I answered the phone, the emails, the door. We waited. How did we? How? And how? How? I don't know how. While we are waiting, I wanted to ask, do you think any of the following are possible? How? So I was really getting into using, I had started using watercolors at this point. And like I mentioned, I have difficulty controlling my brush pen, I have difficulty controlling the watercolors, but I felt like I really wanted to use things that I couldn't control. And I didn't do sketches or pencils for any of these. They're all just directly done on the paper. And there was something about that that was essential for me. Until next time. So this I drew about 10 months after she died. My eyes keep kind of looking, there's like all these flickers, these northern flickers are on my porch right now, and they're gorgeous and they're gigantic and they're making me so happy. Until next time. A couple of years ago, I started drawing lumpy horses. I think it was a reaction to trying really hard to draw horses correctly for my last book. I ended up with a character called Therapy Pony, who is probably actually a horse. Therapy Pony is calm and loving and wise. They have some friends, Mouse, Tiny Therapy Pony, and Sad Bird. After some time, Cheetah appeared. Cheetah is regal. Cheetah has chronic, severe pain. Cheetah and Bird had started talking about what it was like. Then February came, 2020. Bird and Cheetah's discussions had broken down, and I didn't care. Of course, Cheetah was a version of Dynamo, and Sad Bird was a lot like me, and I was too sad to draw anything. But what about now, February 2021? Well, I've been catching glimpses of Cheetah, and then today, there they were, whole and beautiful. Hello, Cheetah. Suddenly you're translucent. Yes, and now we are small. Things are in flux. We're flying over flowers. We're flying out of flowers. We are outside. Inside, there are roses and oceans, and we are both here at the same time. Cheetah. Yes, yes, Cheetah. So on this page, I created this whole kind of alternative universe. And whenever I look at this page, I feel really comforted because I feel like I go through life wondering where Dynamo is, feeling her close to me, and then not feeling her at all. And when I draw these little figures, I feel like I can somehow touch her in a way. So this was just before the year mark, after she died, called Joy Sometimes. And I just feel like over time, my words kind of started falling apart and my images started falling apart more and more as I tried harder to convey the journey I was going through. What is this place? And who lives? And at this point, nothing is familiar. Is it real? I think so. Here we are. And this is year 2, week 1. So April 2021. Do not attempt to predict year 2. You do not know this place. That's what the experts say anyway. If you see strange mountains ahead of you or containers of, or weeping, or in reality, you have no way of knowing. So take a deep, try to stay in. Shh. Because again, no one knows any. This coming year could be any or all of the possible. Just remember, everything is going to. I just have a couple more that I want to read to you. This is called Intexturement, or 16 months. You feel so much farther away this month, ever since the year mark passed, really. Smudged, faded, muffled. I've been grateful for the quiet. But the loss of violent grief, bright, clear flashes of you, is a loss too. The thing that's happening now is new surfaces, I mean, new layers, new accumulations, accretions on parts of my life that started after you left. I'm blocking my screen. After you died, there's already patina, rust, moss, algae. You're really, really 2 summers gone. Plants chosen, tended, done. twice. People you never knew arrived, left. Arrived, stayed, left. I wrote, erased, wrote, rewrote, forgot. Piles of things, new piles, rearranged piles. You're higher in the sky. Meanwhile, new hair, new glasses, new old face. Behind clouds and not in fact gone, only deeper, deeper. And I should say that at some point, which I cannot remember right now, I started using this technique that I'm still really obsessed with, which is watercolors and colored pencils in layers back and forth. And some of the watercolors are, and the colored pencils are like the same color. And so I can kind of layer these textures over them. And this is my last one that I'm going to read to you. It's from about a year ago. And it's kind of, you know, I've been experimenting with colors and shapes and watercolors and brush pens. And I've also just been really obsessed with horses. I mean, I was obsessed with horses when I was 12. Like, I mean, I think many of us were. And in my last book, there was this source of great trauma because I cannot draw horses accurately. And I really felt like I had to for that book. And so the thing that really brings me, or one of the things that brings me the most joy in my life, is drawing horses wrong. And this comic is about joy in the midst of pain and the joy that comes from making comics. Sometimes it's okay, and other times my whole self begins to burn and flood, and everyone falls down, and we all sob and scream. My heart and everyone's heart dissolves. We yell swear words, and at the same time, there are horses. Look, I put them here for us. They can come at any moment. Just ask me. I will always provide horses. The horses don't change anything. Everyone who died is still dead. I continue to despair. I continue to rage. So does everyone. But keep reading. There is a horse. And that is where I will end. Thank you.